The sky is not falling just because a few people dropped out of the Cleveland Browns coaching search. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast.
You are Locked On Browns, your daily Cleveland Browns podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, Dog Pound? I'm Spencer German, your host of the Locked On Browns podcast. I'm proudly covering your Cleveland Browns each and every single day in the land and on the road. It's not the end of the world that two candidates have now bowed out of the Browns head coaching search. Taking a big swing is exactly how the Browns get themselves heading in the right direction. And Brandon Aiyuk's time in San Francisco is clearly over. But honestly, I think it's time for the Browns to blaze their own path at wide receiver. I'll explain coming up. I do want to thank you for being on every day with the Locked On Browns podcast, making us your first listen every single day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the number one sports podcast network, and that is all thanks to you. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is officially in playoff mode every game day during the NFL playoffs. FanDuel is giving new customers even more ways to get in on the action. Just visit FanDuel.com to get started. So I understand what the initial immediate reaction is from people, particularly on Thursday when you got the news that Jesse Minter had basically bowed out of the Browns coaching search and wasn't going to take his interview with the team on Thursday. And it marks the second time this week that a candidate decided, I'm out. I don't need this interview. I'm good. Mike McDaniel doing the same thing. And now it looks a little suspicious on the Mike McDaniel front because he still is taking his interview with the Buffalo Bills. They are, trying to still have a conversation with him, despite the fact that he signed on to be the OC for the Chargers. And so it does kind of look like in that instance, he felt like he wasn't getting the job in Cleveland, wasn't going to waste his time with it. Okay, I can understand that. But at the same time, I still say, like, he probably was looking around saying, like, I got to go to the right place that's like a perfect fit. The Browns, we know, aren't the most attractive job right now. So we don't have to be fearful of saying that, admitting that, while also still not necessarily just saying, like having to hit the panic button because you don't think anybody wants to come here. I don't think that that's a sign of what this is. Jesse Minter was clearly, after his conversation with the Ravens on Wednesday, he was the everything was in effect. The wheels were already sort of turning towards him becoming the next head coach of the Baltimore Ravens, and he didn't leave. He stayed. He takes the job. That announcement came down Thursday. Hours after it was revealed that he wouldn't be coming to Cleveland to take his interview with Cleveland, and he wanted to just kind of focus on the ones that were more certain things, and that was Baltimore. I don't think, and I understand that, like, you see that story, you hear that two candidates have now backed out of their interviews, and I understand what the initial thought process is. Well, this is classic Cleveland. Dysfunction. Nobody wants to work for this owner. Nobody wants to work for this GM. It's just a mess. It's this, it's that, it's whatever. The Browns have not necessarily earned a lot of leeway with the fan base in terms of, like, or maybe the better way to put it is they haven't earned a lot of the benefit of the doubt from the fan base and from other people to just blindly trust that, like, everything's not that problematic or this isn't that big of a deal. And the initial thought process for fans, I understand, is to be like piranhas in, bloodied waters and just jump and say, clearly this isn't working. The search is a disaster. They don't know what they're doing. There's the dysfunction that Jimmy hasn't said isn't there. Clearly is. I understand where that's kind of the place people want to run with this, but I don't see it that way. I don't think this is like a hit the panic button moment. I don't think this is like a, they're botching the search and they're not doing anything right. I think at this point they kind of have their mind on a couple different guys. I think one of those is in the building on Friday and Grant Udinski. I think Jim Schwartz has a legitimate shot. Maybe there's another candidate that gets involved if they decide to talk to Sean McDermott. We'll see. But, like, I think they already kind of have their footing on what direction they want to go. And, like, losing out on these two candidates isn't the end of the world because I don't know that they were even, like, the frontline guys to get the job, frankly. So I'm not like, again, I understand where people just want to say the Browns can't do anything right, and that's the initial reaction. I don't think that this means they're, like, botching the search or that, they're completely so unattractive that nobody wants to come here. I don't see it that way. Somebody's going to take this job. The Browns have their sights set on, I think, a couple of different guys. Well, and that's the other part of this too, is I've also seen people start to say, like, well, you're missing out on guys because you're taking too long, and the process is it's playing out too long, and it's dragging on and on. Guys, this search was always going to go into next week because they were always going to talk to Nate Scheelhaase, and they were always planning on talking to Nate Scheelhaase. And frankly, they haven't talked to two Rooney Rule qualified candidates at this point to even make a hire. So it was going to have to roll in the next week in order to get that part of the equation sort of figured out. So the idea that like they're just lost, have no idea what they're doing, have no direction, they're going to miss out on everybody. Grant Udinski's talking to the Bills too, apparently, or he talked to the Bills already this week. I can't remember what day his interview was, but he's expected to talk to the Bills. Okay, and maybe that's the one team you're worried about. But like, what's funny is like as this search is played out, there weren't any names that I was like, oh no, that's bad for the Browns. Like they missed out on a guy now. When everybody else is kind of zigged, the Browns have kind of zagged in that way. And you can say that that's just a sign of like the Browns don't get these things right if you want, and that their mind's in the wrong place in terms of who they're thinking they should hire, who they're thinking is the best candidate. If you think the process that they're going through is wrong because they don't get this stuff right usually anyway, I guess I could understand that. But at the same time, like we don't have to like sound the alarms because they've missed out on some guys and some guys bowed out. Like I like most of the jobs that have been filled at this point, I didn't think John Harbaugh was actually going to come here. I just said I thought that the Browns needed to try to roll out the red carpet for him to try to convince him to come here. That was the one that I felt like they missed out on. Obviously, the Browns were going to hire Stefanski back. He went to Atlanta. I didn't necessarily think Jesse Minter was going to be a clear-cut, hey, he's coming to Cleveland, even though he was going to even though he had a second interview here. Jeff Hafley really never came up as a name that the Browns were interested in. Robert Saleh with the Titans, same thing. So you're running into a little bit here like, okay, are you worried about the Bills plucking to Udinski? Are you worried about the Ravens were the only other team that interviewed Jim Schwartz? You're not worried about them anymore unless they bring him on as a defensive coordinator, but Jesse Minter's a defensive-minded guy, so I think that's less likely. So I understand why people don't give the Browns any sort of benefit of the doubt when it comes to these types of decisions. But I'm not sitting here thinking that you need to panic or that because the search has gone on longer than most or others, that it means that this is the end-all be-all and oh no, they've completely botched this and everybody's lost and nobody knows what they're doing and the search has gone bad. Like I'm just not subscribed to any of those things. If this goes in the next week and you start missing out on guys that I think the Browns had legitimate interest in hiring, okay, then we can revisit the subject. But right now, I think they have Udinski as one of their top guys. I think they have Nate Scheelhaase as one of their top guys. I think they have Jim Schwartz as one of their top guys. I've talked already about how I'd love to see them get into the mix on McDermott if they want. But that might not even come to fruition. But at the same time, like they haven't missed out on quality people that I believe could be quality candidates that they clearly are also still interested in. And so it's going to be okay here. Like we don't need to go into the weekend freaking out. There's 4 jobs, that are still open. The Raiders, the Cardinals, the Browns, and the Steelers. And I haven't heard any of those teams really linked to anybody else that the Browns have really talked to this point. Maybe Udinski. I honestly though, I think Udinski's only talked to the Bills and the Browns. I don't think he's talked to anybody else. I know the Steelers seem to have like maybe honed in on Mike McCarthy. We'll see. But I'm not, again, this isn't like the end of the world. This isn't some indictment on them being the dysfunctional Browns. You can say that about other things they've done in the past. I'm not saying it about this, and I don't think you should either. With all that said, I know that people might not trust the Browns to make the right decision here. But, taking a big swing is exactly the type of thing that they need to do to turn this franchise around and rewrite all those narratives that lead to the conversation we just had where people just don't believe that anything's going right with their search and that they're inept. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast. Tax season doesn't have to take over your life this year. TurboTax is making it easier than ever to just hand things off and move on with your day and your life. With TurboTax full service, you can have your taxes done by a trusted local expert, start to finish, without the stress of the guesswork. Instead of spending hours trying to figure out forms, you can meet with a local TurboTax expert in person or connect with them online. They handle everything from W-2s to self-employment forms and work to get you every deduction necessary. You can upload your documents, go about your day, and get updates right in the TurboTax app. For a limited time, you can have your taxes done by a local TurboTax expert for just $150 all in. If a TurboTax expert didn't file for you last year, Just file by February 28th. Take taxes off your plate and get back to your life. Visit TurboTax.com/local to book your appointment today. In the vein of talking about the Browns coach search and whether or not they're, going about it the right way here, and whether or not they are, if you trust them to get the job done, I do think that there is there's some truth to the idea that taking that big swing, and we could talk about the definition of big swing, but that taking that big swing is the right move for the Browns when it comes to this decision. And the reason I say that is, and I understand what people are going to say, right? They're going to point to the Jimmy Haslam quote from last year about Deshaun Watson, where he was asked, like, how are you reconciling this years later? And he says, well, we took a big swing and a miss, and it didn't work out. It was bold of him, and I guess, admirable of him to admit that. But I still think that's like the right path forward for the Browns, even though that one didn't necessarily work out. Like, just because one didn't work out as a franchise, you can't be afraid then of taking that big swing the next time you have a major decision on your hands, like hiring a new head coach, which they're dealing with right now. And so that's where I'm kind of at with it, is this idea that, it might not be the worst thing if they hire a Nate Scheelhaus or they hire a Grant Udinski, because it's, again, I've talked about it before. Like, I think the Browns like hearing, or at least Jimmy Haslam likes hearing, that, like, oh, you made the right move. Like, you're out in front of this. Like, this was smart. I think he wants to feel like he's ahead of the curve, and that he's making smart decisions, and that he's getting out in front of things and being forward thinking, if you will. And I think that's what hiring either of those guys does. Even though there's the risk, as I've talked about, of, hey, we've never seen this guy coach a team before. We don't know what it's going to look like. And I reiterate, it's okay to say that. It's okay. I understand all the videos that are out there of him talking football and talking about different things. And people have eaten those up and said, I want Grant Udinski. Sign me up. This guy knows ball. And I'm kind of like, guys, all these coaches know ball in some capacity, or else they wouldn't be in the mix for head coaching jobs. Like, and they know how to teach it to players in an effective way, or else they wouldn't be up for head coaching jobs. So I caution people to just lean into, like, the videos and things as, like, the reasoning why you want a guy. But at the same time, yes, like, hiring a Grant Udinski is taking that big swing and saying, we think we can tap into the fact that this guy is a great offensive mind, up and comer. The next age, the next era of football is going to kind of be about him and his mindset and this style of play and this style of offense. And so we're going to grasp onto that a little bit early, because we think that this is the right direction for us. That's, if they do that, I can live with that, because it's them trying to do what I said and be forward thinking. It might not work out. And again, like, there'll be the revisionist history on that. There'll be people ripping them for it, whatever. But I still say, like, if taking the big swing is how you turn this organization around, frankly. And honestly, like, there's other examples of this. Like, I think the Steelers, when they hired Mike Tomlin, he was 34, I think, at the time when they hired him. And I think at that time he was the youngest coach in football. Before, like, obviously that was before, like, McVay and all that. Like, he got hired at a very young age, for as far as a coach is concerned, Mike Tomlin did. And they kind of took that big swing where it was like, we believe this guy's kind of the next guy and the right leader for this team. Let's tap into this. And look what it did for the Steelers. It worked wonders for them. Like, he was a great coach for all those years. And I know it got stale a little bit at the end, but he still is one of the greatest coaches that's been in this game, or been around this game, at least in the last, several, like, the last 2 decades. I think everybody would agree with that. And so sometimes those things can work out. Sometimes those swings can work out. And I understand people are going to bet against it working out in a place like Cleveland because they think it's just pure dysfunction all the time. But I also think, like, if you get that right, like, talk about how it could change, think about how it could completely change the complexion of the organization and where this thing could be headed if you just nail this search and you get the right guy at the right time and it all works out. I like that the sky could sort of be the limit there, if you will. And I think that that's really important to keep in mind. And that also, it's twofold with the idea that 3 of the 4 teams in this division are making coaching changes whoever nails theirs could really seize the division moving forward. Like that, it could change the pecking order of this division if you get the right coach and and somebody else gets the wrong coach. That sort of exists within this division. So that's important to remember as well. But yeah, I'm not like, and what a big swing is, I think can be, it's going to vary person to person. I think Udinski would absolutely be a big swing. I think Shieldhouse would be a big swing. Honestly, in some ways, like Sean McDermott is a big swing because you're going and getting like the notable name. John Harbaugh would have been a big swing, and you're sort of putting your stock in the guy that's proven and done it before. Like I'm okay with either version of a big swing, whether it's McDermott, whether it's a young guy, because I think like that's what this organization has to do. They've done it wrong for so many years. They haven't been able to get out of their own way for so many years. There's been so many miscues and bad coaching hires and bad quarterbacks and bad drafts and all these things. Like sometimes the big swing's the thing that gets you out of it. And frankly, like I talked about this, I think last year on a pod or last offseason on an episode. It took a big swing in making the Deshaun Watson trade to get you to the place you are right now. They took a big swing, and as Jimmy Haslam told us, in trading for Deshaun and thinking that was going to save them at the quarterback position. It didn't work. We all know that and accept that. And we get to rip the organization for years to come. They should have tried to cut the line in the quarterback position. They shouldn't. But I've always said I thought the thought process was sound of like, we could upgrade this position to get a top 5 guy. Why aren't we jumping at this opportunity? I thought like them thinking through that made sense to me. They just picked the wrong guy and they put too much stock in a guy that clearly doesn't have it anymore. And that's where their evaluation was wrong. But at the same time, it doesn't have to be. But at the same time, like as bad as it was that they took a big swing to get here, it very well might just take a big swing to get out of here and put yourself in position to contend again, get back to the playoffs, be a Super Bowl contender. You don't just playing it safe doesn't always, turn out to be the best option. And I think like of all the people in this scenario right now that we're talking about as far as the head coaching search is concerned, I feel like hiring Jim Schwartz is like the play it safe. As I've talked about it this week, the idea that like maybe he's just like the fallback plan. If everything else fails or you miss out on guys, you just go to Jim Schwartz. And that's kind of like hey, we're playing it safe. I just don't think in this world, in this NFL, we get to sit here and hindsight's always 20/20. And this goes for every organization. You get to criticize them when they make bad decisions. Yes. But like some of the best organizations that we know in sports, some of the best teams in this game that have gone on to win Super Bowls, it all started from like taking a chance and taking a big swing on something. The Patriots dynasty was built on the back of a quarterback that was taken in the 6th round and turned it out to be the greatest quarterback of all time. And Bill Belichick, when he had Drew Bledsoe still on the team, stuck to his guns and played his quarterback that he drafted late in the draft over the guy who was the proven veteran that was one of the better quarterbacks in football. Like, sometimes you take big chances and they work out. Sometimes they don't. The Browns have obviously missed on those more often than not. And so I get there's a trust thing there. But at the same time, you can't be afraid to take those big swings because at some point, hopefully the idea is that it pays off and you end up sort of ahead of the 8 ball because you made that right move and you made that right call. So if it's Udinski, if it's Shieldhouse, if it's a McDermott, who I still think would also be a big swing, I'm on board with that. I think the Jim Schwartz part of this, and it's nothing against Jim Schwartz because I love Jim Schwartz. I just think it's like you're too afraid to venture off of like what you already had and where you already were, and you're too afraid to like ruffle any feathers with the defense that you just kind of go with what's already here. I just think that would be like playing it almost too safe. And so I think you got to almost take that risk and take that big swing, and they shouldn't be afraid to do that. All that said, I want to move more to the roster building side of things because there was some news this week about a wide receiver that could be available in Brandon Aiyuk. Should the Browns pursue him? They've had interest before. We'll talk about it coming up on the Locked On Browns podcast. NFL season, or NFL playoffs, I should say, are in full swing. And there's nothing like being at the game. The crowd noise, the energy, the cheering alongside other fans. Watching at home, listen, I get it. It's great. But being in the stadium, it just hits different. The frustrating part has always been getting tickets, waiting in queues, dealing with logins, and watching prices change right at checkout. That's why Game Time gives the advantage back to the fans. It's the hack for unlocking amazing NFL tickets and experiences in just a few taps. One of my favorite features is being able to see the view of your seat while you're sort of surveying and scanning what tickets you want, so there's no surprises. You know exactly what things are going to look like from where you're going to sit. I also like the fact that the fees are included up front, so as you're clicking through seats, you know exactly what you're paying at the very end. There's no surprises. Take the guesswork out of buying NFL tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app and create an account. Use code LOCKEDONNFL, LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, just create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Download the Game Time app today and get back to being there live. Today's episode also brought to you by our friends at FanDuel, and it's officially Conference Championship Week, and FanDuel is in playoff mode every game day during the NFL playoffs. FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get in on the action. Right now, NFL playoff game days, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. That's right, each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts that you can apply to your bets that you like the most. You just open your profit boost pack first thing on game day and see what boosts you want to apply. Patriots going on the road to Denver, and they are 5.5-point favorites somehow. Maybe you want to bet high on that because I wouldn't trust Jarrett Stidham. Do you trust Jarrett Stidham? And you don't think the Broncos are going to be able to get this thing done? I totally get that. You can apply your profit boost pack, or maybe you can build out a same-game parlay for Rams and Seahawks, which is bound to be a high-scoring affair, and play the over while you're at it, which right now on FanDuel is set at 46.5. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You make your picks, then apply your profit boost to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs continue rolling. So visit FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL game day right now. All right. Sorry. So there were some comments made this week in the end of season press conference by John Lynch and Kyle Shanahan for the 49ers, where they talked about their embattled wide receiver, Brandon Aiyuk, who's had a very weird relationship with the team this year while he's kind of been away, dealing with an injury, all these different things. And John Lynch flat out came out and said that, quote, "I think it's safe to say he's played his last snap with the 49ers. I thought there was more to this quote, but apparently not. That was the gist of it. Kyle Shanahan added, "It takes a lot of things to get a contract voided during a season. I've never dealt with that in my career and been in any building that's had that." So, like, they basically were very discouraged by the way that whole thing played out. The fact that he got his contract voided speaks to how that relationship deteriorated and where things kind of stand. There was that weird video a couple weeks ago of him driving past the stadium at like 100 miles per hour or something crazy. I don't know all the details going on out there in San Francisco. All I know is that John Lynch flat out told you this relationship's over. We're probably moving on from Brandon Aiyuk. He probably wants to move on, and he wants a new home. And I know that whenever these big names pop up or bigger names pop up on the market for certain positions, and especially at the wide receiver position, which is a big need for the Browns right now, I know the initial reaction is, well, the Browns should go get him. And I think it's twofold with somebody like Brandon Aiyuk, because Brandon Aiyuk and the Browns have had some history already. We know before the 2024 season, the Browns were inquiring about potentially trading for Brandon Aiyuk. Push that button, try to get a deal done. Didn't happen. He ends up staying in San Francisco and signing a contract extension when he was holding out at the time. And so I'm sure there's probably some interest there still from the Browns to pursue this. You know, Brandon Aiyuk is still a relatively young receiver in his mid-20s that the Browns clearly thought like, hey, we can pair him with Jerry Jeudy and build this great receiving core and all these different things. And I get that thought process. I was on board with them pursuing him and being interested in him at the time to sort of start thinking about the future of the wide receiver room after the Amari Cooper days were going to be over. They were over pretty quickly in 2024, as we know. So yeah, like I just think I liked it at the time, and I'm sure there probably is still some level of interest there in the Browns trying to acquire a player like that, because they showed interest before, and now he's going to be available likely via trade from the 49ers. Now, that said, I think it's time for the Browns to start building their own future, or start developing their own wide receivers and building this wide receiver room a different way than they have in the past. I understand that Andrew Berry's been a wizard when it, like the one, if you want to criticize Andrew Berry for his drafts and some of the other moves he's made, the Deshaun trade, obviously, I get all that. One place where he's largely done well is trading for wide receivers. He hit on Amari Cooper. At least we have a good year and a bad year. Jerry Jeudy, we'll see how that sort of shakes out. Maybe people think that's a bad deal now because of how bad he played this year. I can understand that. I'm not saying he's always been perfect. He's not batting 1,000, but he has been able to find some value in wide receivers when he's traded for them. And so the thought process of like, yeah, go trade for Brandon Aiyuk could be another one of those instances where maybe he gets it right and he makes the trade necessary to bolster this room. I can subscribe to that a little bit, but here's what I would say. I just think it's time at this point. If the Browns are really thinking about the future, if the Browns are really thinking about like building this thing from the ground up, especially at certain positions like wide receiver, I think it's just time that they start drafting and developing these guys. We've knocked the organization for that for years, that haven't been able to develop any wide receiver talent. It's time to make that happen. It's time to hit on guys in the draft, build this wide receiver room from the ground up, and stop banking on, I'm going to trade picks or whatever for some player that's already out there in existence that we think is going to be a good fit. I'm not saying that can't work, but I just think it's time to finally build this wide receiver room from scratch. Build this wide receiver room with young guys that can be part of the future, that can play with whatever quarterback you're going to be trotting out there in 2026. Maybe Shedeur Sanders. I still sort of lean it probably will be Shedeur Sanders. Whatever quarterback you're trotting out there in 2027. If you end up drafting a different guy to be your franchise quarterback down the line, give him weapons that can sort of be established, young, that he can grow with, build with, and in the same way like the Bengals have done in Cincinnati, where it's they got two young receivers paired with Joe Burrow on similar timelines, and you just kind of go with that group. I think there's a lot of value in that, and I think it's probably time that's the philosophy the Browns take when it comes to certain positions, especially at the wide receiver spot. I also think Brandon Aiyuk's injury history now is more of a concern than it probably was a year ago. These things have piled up, and he just missed this whole last season, so I'm not sure that I want to necessarily sign on for that. I think it's probably just time to let that ship sail, not pursue Brandon Aiyuk, and start finding wide receivers that are just Cleveland Browns drafted and developed from the ground up. That's where I'm at with it. The organization has failed at that in the past. But it's up to Andrew Berry now to finally get this position figured out. He's been allergic to drafting receivers earlier than the third round. That's got to change, and I think that probably will change this year. But he needs to figure that position out with talented players who can just kind of grow in their role from draft day to second contract and let it be what it is. No more of this let's just trade for a guy and figure it out. You got to start hitting on some of these players. And I don't think you need to pursue Aiyuk for that reason, but also because the injury stuff. And it just seems like at this point, he let things get pretty sour there in San Francisco. I don't know that you want that happening here in Cleveland when he's already disgruntled, wants the fresh start. But, you don't have the right infrastructure at this point. The offense is so bad. I mean, we saw at times Jerry Jeudy's frustrations. Do you really want to bring a guy in and let a guy who's already frustrated bring those frustrations here and let that boil over on the field or whatever with the offense that you've kind of built? There's a lot going on right now. The Browns need a better infrastructure. It's easier to draft a guy and be you're going to be part of our grand plans. We see a bright future for you here, and then build around them than it is to bring a guy in and convince him we're going to be different this year. I just think it's probably not in the cards for the Browns to make a trade for Brandon Aiyuk, and I think it's probably best that they explore other avenues to bolster their wide receiver room. If you like what you heard, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make Locked On Browns your first listen every day, wherever you get your podcasts, and at the Locked On Browns YouTube channel. Also, want to remind you, if you never miss an episode, if you're an everydayer, the Everydayer Club is built for you. Get Locked On Browns ad-free, plus members-only Discord access and more. Just go to lockedonbrowns.supercast.com or check the link in the show notes to learn more. For those of you on video, we send you your first ever 24/7 National NBA YouTube channel. On audio, make sure you make your second listen to Locked On NFL. You can also keep it local. Check out Locked On Cavs or Locked On Guardians. Thank you for being an everydayer at the Locked On Podcast Network. Have a good weekend. I'll talk to you Monday.